All right, awesome. Fantastic. All right, great. So if you remember last time, what we were doing was to discuss very important information about the listening section, all general aspects we saw. And we also had a very, very much fruitful discussion on how to take notes, right, for this section, how to take efficient notes, actually. And well, I told you that this skill, this ability to take notes efficiently is quite important. It's, I would say, indispensable for you to learn how to take efficient notes in this part of the exam, because they are going to be super useful when you write down your summaries, when you write down your reminders for later on, and then when you have a question that you don't remember, you can come to your very much trustworthy and handy notes in order to remember that information, right? Well, fantastic. So what else? So remember that now that we're going to, or now that we have finalized actually with our discussion of all these aspects that I have mentioned, it's time for us to also discuss the types of questions you will find in this section. Why? Because as I told you, the characteristic I love the most about the TOEFL exam is that it's very predictable and repetitive. And given that it is this way, we can, as I say, always predict the way that ETS asks some questions to our persons. That is to say, the way that ETS asks its questions is always similar. It's almost identical, actually, I would say. But what they ask, of course, is always different, given that every single time they are creating new material, they are making up new passages, new lectures, but how they ask their questions about those lectures, conversations, reading passages is always similar and identical, okay? So now we're going to discuss these types of questions, and you're going to find them to be, as I say, very much helpful when you respond to the practices we're going to start tomorrow and also this Saturday, as I say. But nonetheless, let us discuss them one by one. Let us start with this one that is called the main idea question. And let us read what I have included here in our presentation for you. Every listening sample will begin in the same way, with a main idea question. You remember, dear students, when we were discussing the reading section and I told you, okay, guys, it happens that the last question for each reading passage in the reading section is going to be a summary question. You remember that, right? When we discussed that and I told you, okay, although you're going to have 10 questions per reading passage, right? Last week we said this when we were in the reading section, and I told you, although you have 10 questions, the last one will always be a summary question and always responded at the end. Here we have a very similar situation. Even in that aspect, these sections are very similar. So as I say, I love this exam because it's always like that. It's always very repetitive. And that is great because for us, when we have a lot of repetition in something, we can perform very good at it, right? We can find tricks, hacks, and to create a systematic manner to approach it. So that is what we're doing right now. As I say, the first question you will always receive for each of your materials in the listening section will be a main idea question. Remember that in this case, you have two different types of material. First of all, you have lectures, and then you have conversations. That is what you're going to listen to in this section. Now, per lecture, you will have 6 questions, as we saw last time. And per conversation, you will have 5 questions. But the first of those questions will always be, for any of those materials, a main idea question. That is what I'm trying to express here. Now, these questions ask you to identify the main point of the lecture or conversation, as simple as that. They usually take one of the following forms, okay? Here are the wordings you can expect in these questions, so that when you see one of these wordings in the question, you say, okay, well, this is a main idea question, and you can identify it very rapidly and easily, right? So what is the main idea of the lecture? What subject is the professor mainly discussing? What was the conversation mainly about? So those are the wordings. If you see something like this, dear students, in your question, then you see, okay, well, this is a main idea question. It's very easy to identify it, okay? You are always going to have a wording similar to these options and these examples I'm giving you here right now. Well, very good. So let us move on to a practice in order for us to, of course, as well illustrate this main idea question. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to let you listen, okay, to a lecture that I recorded. I was doing this actually this afternoon because, well, it was necessary for you to have a very clear insight in these questions. So I thought, okay, it's going to be good if I record a lecture. And well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reproduce this lecture and you have to take notes, okay? I want you to practice that skill we have recently acquired. What you have to do, remember, in all these lectures and in all these conversations, you take notes while you listen. There is not a special time for you to, or a separate time for you to take notes on your listening or, as I say, in any of these responses or anything like that. You take notes of the lecture or conversation while you're listening that conversation or lecture. There's no other time. There's no separate time like, I don't know, a voice saying, okay, now we give you 30 seconds for you to take notes and then we can start. Sadly, it doesn't happen that way. The way it works, as I say, is that you have to take notes of your conversation and your lecture as well, depending on which material you're receiving and analyzing at that time. You have to take your notes while you listen to that material, while you listen to the conversation, or while you listen to the lecture. And remember that you are not able to listen to your lectures or conversations twice, merely once. Therefore, be very much careful at taking your notes, and please make sure that all the main points and ideas, in order for you to remember them, are efficiently written on your paper as we have discussed last week, or excuse me, last class, right? Fantastic. So let us listen this lecture that I say I recorded for you, and then we're going to practice this type of question. Okay, let's go, and please take notes on this, apply everything we have learned last class. Let's go.
How many of you have heard of Alessandro Di Mariano di Vanni Filippelli? No? Nobody? Well, let me put it this way. How many of you are familiar with the work of an artist called Sandro Botticelli? Or just Botticelli? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's definitely an easier name to remember. But a lot of you might also be surprised to learn that his work fell out of favor from shortly after the Renaissance until the late 19th century. That's right. It's really only within the past 150 years that Botticelli's work has returned to popularity, and yet, within that time, his name, well, his alias, has become synonymous with the kind of grace and beauty that characterizes the best of Renaissance painting. Patronized by the famous Medici family, Botticelli's work was celebrated during his lifetime for some of these same qualities. While his earliest works often used religious subject matter, well, we've seen this throughout the course, haven't we? How common this was. These are not the works that are most celebrated today. In fact, let me ask you, what are the paintings that you most associate with Botticelli? Well, The Birth of Venus is definitely one of Botticelli's better-known works. His masterpiece, Primavera, which was painted 3 years earlier, was done in the same vein. Primavera means spring in Italian, and here's a slide of the painting just here. These are works that didn't rely entirely on the iconography of the Catholic Church. While we do see some holdovers from Botticelli's earliest work, the main subjects of these paintings go back to earlier traditions of gods and goddesses. Note the extensive use of nature as a metaphor, in addition to the nudity of some of these figures, or the skimpy clothes used to cover them. Actually, however, Botticelli was extremely religious and would end up painting work for churches and cathedrals using Catholic iconography for the rest of his life. The Madonna and Child, for example, were a popular subject. Because of that, it's kind of strange that he fell out of favor. At least his paintings were in churches, chapels, and villas all over Italy. But in 1502, almost a decade before he died, in 1510, he was already disappearing from the public eye. Even though he had painted frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, Botticelli's work was commonly overlooked in favor of that by his neighboring artist, Michelangelo. It took almost 3 centuries before an English collector William Young Otley, bought a Botticelli in Italy and brought it back to England in 1799. Even then, the painting wasn't exhibited in public for almost another 60 years, when its next owner, William Fuller Maitland, lent it to an Art Treasures exhibition in 1856. There, it was seen by more than 1 million viewers, and art historians began to take note. Some of these historians had already taken an interest in Botticelli's Sistine Chapel's frescoes, and his reputation again began to blossom. By the end of the century, Botticelli's work had been extensively admired. The pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood found inspiration in them. The first monograph, or book of paintings, by the artist was published in 1893. Botticelli had the last laugh, though, in the first 20 years of the 20th century. More books were written about his art than about the art of any other painter dead or alive. It just goes to show you, the art world is ruled by trends. Just because a particular artist isn't popular at a given moment doesn't mean that there is no value in his or her work, or that it won't be popular once more, even if it does take 3 centuries.
Fantastic. There you are. Well, as you can see, that would be the lecture, right? In this case, it was a very interesting topic, in my opinion. A very much famous painter, Botticelli, right? Well, fantastic. Now that we have listened, I hope that you found the lecture to be very much easy to understand, and that you also apply all the skills we have been learning throughout this week. Well, fantastic. Let us go now and return to the question. So, a main idea question for this particular lecture would look like this. What is the main idea, or what is the main point, of the professor's lecture? Remember that this is one of the options that I gave you, right? What is the main idea of? So whenever you see a wording like this, then you can identify it quickly and say, okay, this is a main idea question. Well, we have the answers here. It says, people today should know more about the different styles that Botticelli used. Botticelli's career exemplifies certain historical tendencies of the art world. We can never know the artists who might be popular in the future. Botticelli's religious paintings were more important than his paintings that depicted non-religious subjects. Great, those are the answers, okay? And well, here, although you can see the response on my screen already, let us come back here and let us meditate on some recommendations in order for you to respond this type of question always with a correct response, okay? So in order to correctly choose your answers, you must be very precise, dear students, in choosing only those answers conveying the central ideas of the passage, okay? Now let us remember what is a central idea or what is a main idea. I think that it is very important for us to remember this, that we have actually already discussed last week when we were in our summary questions, I think, right? So as I say, we're going to remember in this case, what are main ideas in order for us to be able to identify, in this case, the correct response. That, well, as I mentioned, very much conveniently asks for us to respond, what is the main idea of this lecture, right? So first of all, let us remember and let us specify what is not a main idea or central idea. A main idea is not necessarily the idea that began a passage, okay, as you can see here. Not just because it's at the beginning, it means it is the main idea. It's not also the idea that ended the passage necessarily, not just because it's the last sentence or the last lines in your lecture in this case, it means that, of course, this is the main idea. That is not the case, as I mentioned. Details are never main ideas. If something was mentioned just out of curiosity, or it was mentioned as, I don't know, a brief explanation that was, as I say, without any real significance or any real relevance to the lecture, it cannot be the main idea. And finally, it is not what you remember the most. This is, I say, well, in my opinion, or in my personal experience, this is the most common detail. Not just because you have something on mind, it means that it's the main idea. Sometimes we have something on mind of this lecture, that is to say, we remember it the most because we thought it was curious, or I don't know, it hilarious or it was interesting at that time. And that's the reason why we save it and keep it for us on our mind. But as I say, not necessarily, not just because you have it on mind, it means that it is the main idea. So what is the main idea then? How can we identify what is the main idea or central idea? A main idea is that one that has framed all discussion and data. Imagine it this way. Imagine that you have a dish of food and you take another vessel and you tap your food with that vessel. That is framing. It's encapsulating, circling, is closing something, enclosing information. Imagine, for example, that your lecture, the one that you listen to, imagine if it were merely different information thrown, like, I don't know, this point, another point, another point, another point, but all those points without connection, what would happen? It wouldn't make sense, right? Because it would be just a mere compilation of a lot of points, information, etc., etc. But if there is an idea that unifies all those points, all those knowledges, data mentioned in the lecture, if there is something that makes it a whole, that unifies all that, that is the main idea. What makes, as I say, all the information, data that we have listened, a whole, what makes it a whole, what makes it a unity. That is how you identify the main idea, okay? Fantastic. Well, now, don't let yourself to be deceived by some answers presenting you textual references from the passage. Many answers may contain material that is indeed in the passage, but you should ask yourself if that was only a contingent detail, something that you can dispense with, or actually the main idea. In some cases, the speaker himself will identify the main idea, so pay attention. And this is something actually very interesting and intriguing. If you noticed in this case, for example, of this lecture that I delivered, it happened that at the end of the lecture, I actually said, right? The professor said, what was the main idea of this entire lecture? That is not necessarily going to happen every single time in your exam. You're going to notice when we practice that sometimes the professor simply doesn't mention what is the main idea. But anyways, you have to identify it following all the instructions that I have just shared with you, right? But sometimes I have noticed this in my experience as well, that the professors do mention what is the main idea at the end of the passage. So pay attention until the last part, okay, until the end. That is the recommendation here. Very good. So for this question, I think there is no mystery. The correct response is answer B. Why? Because the professor's main point is that Botticelli's work shows that some artists fall in and out of popularity over time. If you missed this, it might have been because you stopped listening towards the end of the lecture. A good reminder to stay alert, though it may be hard or difficult for the whole thing. As I say, at the end of the lecture, I expressed that Botticelli goes to show us, right, that not because an artist is not popular or recognized in the present, it means that in the future is not going to be recognized or valued, even if it does take 3 centuries, right? So here, this part of the lecture tells you, right? What was the entire idea connecting all this lecture? It was not merely a compilation of information about Botticelli. The reason, the idea that unifies the entire passage is, as I say, that the professor wanted to show her students through this lecture that Botticelli exemplifies something very common in art, that not just because somebody is not recognized nowadays, it means that in the future he will not be recognized too. It can actually happen that although you are not valued today, in the future, your art, your work is going to be recognized, right? And that is what the professor says, Botticelli shows us, right? A tendency in art world. That is to say, a tendency in art history. And that is exactly what the professor had as a main idea for the entire lecture, right? Botticelli's career exemplifies certain historical tendencies of the artwork, the one that I say, right? That, some artists fall in and out of popularity, but it doesn't mean, as I say, that they are not going to be recognized at the end. And the professor, I think, that clearly states this when she says, when I say, or when he says that well, Botticelli had the last laugh, right? Because although he wasn't recognized at the beginning, and he was, let's say, at the shadow of Michelangelo at the end, he was the most famous painter, right? Botticelli. Very good. What about the other answers, for example? People today should know more about different styles that Botticelli used. Well, this is clearly not the correct answer, right? Because the professor never actually discussed about Botticelli's styles. She just talked about the characteristics or traits of his art, but she never mentioned if he painted in this particular style or this other one. This is not even mentioned in the lecture, therefore it cannot be the correct answer. C, we can never know the artists who might be popular in the future. Now, this may be a tempting response, and I see why, because it says we can never know the artists who might be popular in the future. But if you notice, dear students, this cannot be the correct answer because it's a confusing response. What do I mean by that? That if you notice what the professor said was that not just because you are not famous now, in the future you are not going to be recognized. She's saying, well, if you are not recognized nowadays, as Botticelli was not recognized in his time, that doesn't mean that even if it does take 3 centuries, you're not going to be valued or recognized in the future. But that is not the same as saying we cannot know the artists who might be popular in the future, because the professor doesn't discuss who can be or who cannot be popular, who is going to be or who is not going to be popular. The only thing she says is that it is possible that if you are not recognized or valued nowadays as Botticelli, in the future, you can actually be recognized, but who knows, right? If it does take 3 centuries, fantastic, but nonetheless, she never says that we cannot know who is going to be popular or that we can know who is going to be popular. The only thing that she does is to establish the historical fact that it is possible, merely possible, not to be popular or recognized in your time, but to be popular and recognized in the future. But she never says something about who is going to be popular or who is not going to be popular, right? It's very different if you think about it. So as I say, it's not the correct response. Be very careful. They are very confusing. They are very much tricky here. And well, Botticelli's religious paintings were more important, and his paintings that depicted non-religious subjects cannot be the correct answer because, well, the professor doesn't talk about the relevance of his art in religious or non-religious contexts, right? The only thing that he said, is that, well, the professor said that, in this case, Botticelli's paintings were somehow religious at some point, but then he also painted a lot of non-religious subjects. Well, is there any question, dear students, about this type of question? Anything that I could clarify here? Please tell me. Questions? Mariana, Roy, dear Abigail, dear Roy, dear Mariana, questions about this type of question? No questions?
No questions.
No questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Fantastic, guys. Great, there we are. Let us continue. Type of question number 2, function question. Now, the listening function question will test your ability to understand why a certain idea or argument has been used in the passage. They will ask you to draw conclusions about the information that has been spoken in the passage. The question will replay a segment of the recording that contains the topic of the question, and then we'll replay just the topic. This is a very similar question to the purpose question of the reading section. We have seen that with you already, so you don't have any reason to worry. Basically, this asks you, why is the professor saying something? What reason does the professor have for including a sentence? What is he trying to convey? What is he trying to cause with this sentence, right? That is this question, basically. You have to find out, why is the professor saying this? What is the objective? What is the effect the professor is trying to cause with a particular sentence, right? Let us go and listen to another example that I prepared for you in order to get this question, okay? Please take your pencil, sheet of paper, take your notes, okay? Apply everything we have seen in last class. Let's go.
I want to continue our discussion about whales. Specifically today, I want to talk about whale migration. Why whales head south for the winter? Or really, why whales in the cold water of the northern hemisphere head south for the winter. Now, not all kinds of whales migrate, but most baleen whales do. And interestingly enough, we still don't really know why the baleen whales migrate. We do have several theories, however, which I'll discuss today. Can anybody name one reason why baleen whales might migrate south to the warm tropical water?
For food? The whales move to warmer water in order to find a good area to feed?
Good guess. That should be an obvious reason. After all, most animals that migrate do so for the purpose of finding food. But, that doesn't seem to be the case with baleen whales. To understand why, you need to know something about water temperature. There are a lot of technical reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. But let's just say that nutrients don't rise to the surface of tropical water like they do in other kinds of water. Tropical water simply never gets cold enough. So, well, what this means is that tropical water doesn't have much of the plankton that most whales feed on.
I don't understand. If there's no plankton, how do the whales survive through the winter?
Right. How do they survive? You see, they don't have to eat anything because they've stored up so much fat during the summer feeding season that they can just survive off of that. So if they don't need to eat anything, we're back to our original question. Why do baleen whales migrate? Any theories? No? Well, there's one idea out there that a lot of people believe. In fact, you could say it's the most popular theory we have about whale migration. Basically, the argument is that for baleen whales, migration is a kind of balancing act. Let me explain. On one hand, whales need to take advantage of the summer months by eating as much food as they can. And that's what they can do best in the northern seas. This allows them to build up a lot of fat. But in the winter, food is scarce, even in the north. So what the whales need to do is save energy. And that's what migrating south can help them do. Amanda, you have a question?
Yes. The balancing act theory doesn't make sense to me. Maybe whales might need to save energy during the winter, but wouldn't moving all the way down to the tropics make them lose energy?
That's a good point. And it's one reason why this isn't a perfect theory. It does cost the whales energy to migrate, but it's easier for whales to save energy in warm water than it is to save energy in cold water. So there might still be, a good reason to move south for the winter, okay? Now, before moving on to the next chapter, I want to briefly discuss how the baleen whale manages to navigate. It's pretty remarkable because the whales manage to return to the same places year after year and have to travel over an enormous area of ocean in order to do it. I mean, it's not like whales can just look at a map, right? So, exactly how do they do it? Well, a lot of experimental work still needs to be done, but we have been able to figure out at least 3 ways the baleen whale navigates without getting lost. The first is the ability to use Earth's magnetic field like it was a map. That sounds strange, but we know that many birds use that method, use the magnetic field, and it's possible that whales have the biological ability to do the same thing. Another theory is that if they stay close to the coast, whales might be able to find familiar landmarks and use those as guides. But we don't really know if a whale's eyesight is good enough to be able to do that, so that's not a perfect theory. And finally, we know that many whales make very loud sounds that can travel literally hundreds of miles underwater. Through a process called echolocation, it's possible that these whales hear the sounds bounce off of islands or other pieces of land and use those echoes as clues to help them find their way.
Very good. So that would be the lecture. Now we're going to listen to the question that is in this same recording. But yeah, let me explain them very rapidly what's going to happen right now. For this type of question, dear students, we have a very, very special, and it's actually the only part of the exam where this happens. In this question, although I told you right at the beginning of this class, you're not able to listen to your lecture once again. Now, that is not totally true because in this question, the question lets you to listen once again to one fragment or part of the lecture you just listened. Okay? To a little fragment, you're going to understand what I say. And they're going to actually let you listen two different parts. First of all, they're going to let you listen a little bit of context, right? Something like 6, 7, or 8 seconds of the lecture you just listened to. And then they're going to let you listen to a very short sentence. And the question is going to be, what does the professor mean when she says this? And the question, as you're going to notice here, is going to be merely about the last sentence you listened to. As I say, the question will let you listen to two parts of the recording. First of all, a very short background or context that will last for 6, 8 seconds, and then to a sentence that is within that same recording, but in this case, only that very short sentence. And the question, as you're going to see right now, is going to be about the last sentence, not about the entire background, but the last sentence you listen to. That is the objective of the question. The question is going to be asking you about the last sentence. Listen, you're going to notice. Okay, I'm gonna reproduce it here. Doesn't matter, I have it here. Listen.
Hey.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
This is the first part. Listen, it's the first part you're going to listen.
To understand why, you need to know something about water temperature. There are a lot of technical reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. But let's just say that nutrients don't rise to the surface of tropical water like they do in other kinds of water.
Right. So that is the background or context they give you. Now, out of this context, they are going to take a sentence. And as you can see, they are going to reproduce that only sentence. And the question is going to be about that sentence, the last one, that short sentence. That is going to be the objective of the question. Okay, so listen.
What does the professor mean when she says this?
There are a lot of technical reasons that I'm not going to go into right now.
As you could see, this sentence was already included in the last recording you listened to, right, of the context. But as I say, they give you the opportunity to listen to this sentence. Excuse me. They give you the opportunity to listen to this sentence in its context, and then they take it out and they reproduce the sentence alone. And as I say, the question is not about the context or the background. It's about the sentence, the lonely sentence you listen at the end, okay? So as you could listen to, the question is, what does the professor mean when she says this? And then the sentence, right? There are a lot of technical details that I'm not going to go into right now, right? That is the sentence. They are asking you. Why? Although the wording of the question is different, the question is basically asking you, why does the professor include this sentence? What was the effect the professor was trying to cause in her audience and in her lecture when she said this? What is the effect? What was the reason why she included this? What did she want to say or state? What was the expression she wanted to convey to her students? As I say, it's a function question. It's asking you for you to understand the purpose. Why did she include this? What was the effect she was trying to cause by saying this, right? That is what you have to understand when you receive this type of question. And as I say, it's very easy to identify it because it's always going to reproduce, first of all, a background, a context, and then it's going to take out a very short sentence out of that context and it's going to reproduce the sentence alone. And the question is going to be about the sentence alone, as I say. All right, great. Now let us see the possible answers. Here we have them. So, what does the professor mean when she says, there are a lot of technical details that I'm not going to get into right now, right? But as I say, the question is basically telling you, what effect was she trying to cause with this sentence, right? And here we have the answers. She's not an expert on what she's about to discuss. She will discuss only what is relevant to her main point. or she thinks her students already understand her point. D, she will not repeat what was discussed in previous classes. Great. So as I say, what effect did she want to cause in her lecture or class with this particular sentence? And here you have the answers. Well, how to respond to this type of question? To effectively respond to this type of question, dear students, you must ask yourself, what effect does the alluded portion have over the context or topic? It might, for example, initiate, correct, imply, redirect, or rhetorically postulate something. As I told you, professors normally have reasons for the sentences and the material they include in their lectures. They want to promote an effect. There is an effect they want to cause in their lecture or in their students by including that particular sentence. Sometimes they include those sentences in order to initiate something, in order to correct something sometimes, in order to imply something, to redirect something, or, excuse me, to rhetorically postulate something. There are a lot of reasons, right? And that is the first question you should ask yourself. Why? Why is the professor, what is the professor trying to cause? Does she want to initiate a discussion? Does she want to make something? Does she want to imply something? Does she want to redirect this conversation? Does she want to rhetorically say something? What is she trying to do, right? That is the first question you should ask yourself about this sentence. Now, 2, pay attention to the alluded portion's mode. This is exactly what I told you last time as well. The sentence can be interrogative, can be exclamative, can be subjunctive, can be indicative, and so forth. In this case, if you remember, I told you, right? Subjunctive is when you are trying to say something that you are not sure about or that is merely likely to happen. And indicative is when you are speaking with affirmations. This is going to be this way, or this is this way, right? And in this case, I think that if you think about our sentence, the mode of our sentence that we have to respond about is indicative because it's clarifying something. It's responding something. And actually, that also responds to our first question here that we should always ask ourselves. What effect is this causing in the audience and in the lecture? And if you think about it, the professor is responding to a question. Therefore, she must be clarifying something, right? Because if you remember the context in which this was said, it was when a student asked her something, right? And she says, okay, in order to respond to that question, there are a lot of technical details that we are not going to get into right now. But let us just say, right? And she continues. So, as I say, all those aspects give you a very, very good insight on what effect is the professor trying to cause. What is she trying to express with this sentence? And that is what you have to answer in this type of question, okay? So what is the correct response in this question, dear students? The correct one is B, she will discuss only what is relevant to her main point. Why? How can you know this? As I say, the fact that this is a response to a question should give you a hint and a clue that she is going to clarify something, right? And when she's clarifying here, in this case, is that in order to respond her students' question, she could talk about different things, right? She could talk about this and that and this detail about whales and that. But let us just say, right? She says, let us just say. So she's saying we can talk about different things. We could talk about thousands of things. But in this case, let us just say this, right? So she is, in this case, as I say, clarifying that although many things could be said on this topic, she's just going to talk about a particular thing. And what is that? As I say, she is affirming and clarifying that she will only discuss what is relevant to her main point, right? To respond to the question her student is, in this case, making and proposing. As I say, we are using here our criteria. We are paying attention to the indicative mode of our sentence. It could be very different, for example, if the professor were using, I don't know, a subjunctive mood, right? Saying like, it could be possible that this is like that, right? In this case, she could be casting doubt upon something. Or it could be very different if she were screaming, for example, saying, come on, dear student, right? Because that would give us another insight. But in this case, she's not screaming, she's not asking anything, she's affirming something, she's clarifying, right? So all those aspects give us the answer. What effect is she trying to cause? What is she trying to express? What is the reason behind the sentence? Is that she will only discuss what is relevant to her main point, right? What about her responses? She's not an expert on what she's about to discuss. Well, this cannot be correct because she never says if she is an expert on something or she never, for example, proposes or casts doubts on her expertise, for example. She didn't say something like, oh, I'm not sure if I can respond to that question, right? That could be a reason maybe to say this is the correct answer, but we don't listen to that, right? We don't listen to her saying, oh, I'm not sure if I can respond to that, sorry, right? She doesn't say that. Or C, for example, she thinks her students already understand her point. Not at all, right? Because she would say something like, come on, right, Michael, come on, right? That would be a way in which we could identify that she's trying to make a point, like, come on, like, this is easy, right? Or she will not repeat what was discussed in previous classes. Also cannot be the correct response because she would have said something like, but don't you remember what we saw last Monday, right? Something like that, but she doesn't say anything like that. Therefore, B is the only correct answer to this question. Any clarification that I could make here, dear students? Anything that I could clarify? Please tell me. Mariana, Roy, Abigail.
It's clear.
Okay, thank you very much, dear Abigail. What about the rest of you guys? Questions?
No questions.
Okay, thank you very much, dear Roy. Great, we are fine then. So let us go to the last type of question we're going to see tonight, and it's this one, inference question. And trust me, this is way easier. Inference questions will usually look very similar to one of these examples. What can be inferred from the professor discussion of X? What will the student probably do next? What is implied when the speaker says this? We have also seen this last time, dear students. What is this? It's an inference question. This was exactly the same case that we saw in the reading section. Do you remember? An inference is basically a conclusion, a rational conclusion that you make out of certain information you have, right? We have seen this already. And as I say, what you have to do in this opportunity, dear students, is to merely discuss and to think about what can we infer about what the professor or the speaker says. No more than that. What can we conclude out of the information we have and he gives us in this material we are listening? No more than that. Super easy. Let us listen to another conversation in this case in order to respond this. Take your notes, use all the skills we have learned. Okay, let's go.
Listen to a conversation between a student and an administrator at the university's finance office.
Hi there. Can I help you?
I really hope you can. I'm worried I'm just really worried I'm going to be in trouble.
Oh? Well, don't panic. Just relax. I'm sure we can deal with whatever's going on. What's the issue?
Well, I've received 2 separate statements about my tuition payments in the last week, and they seem to... It looks like they kind of contradict each other.
Uh-huh.
I've been a student here for 2 years, and I've never gotten any notice like this before. The language seems a little threatening, and I'm afraid that if I don't figure this out, I'll be kicked out of classes or something.
I can assure you that nobody's going to kick you out of class. We'll sort it out. Now, did you bring the letters with you?
Yep, I have them right here. The first one is similar to the reminder I get every month to make a payment, but...
Here, let me see.
It has some extra language out of the norm, there at the bottom. It says something about penalty payments.
All right. And did you miss any payments that you know of?
No, I've never missed one.
That's strange. And what about the second notice you received?
That one says it's the final warning to make a payment, or else my enrollment will be canceled. That doesn't make any sense because it's the first warning I ever got.
Okay, are you sure these are the only 2 notices you got in the mail from us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, then, it certainly seems like there's been an error, because if the statement were accurate, you would have received additional notices from us. Let me just look up your account in our database and see what the problem is.
Thank you so much. I'm just a little stressed out that something will go wrong with my classes.
Oh, sure. Just a moment while I... Here we go. I think I found the problem. Did you make your last payment during a school holiday?
Sure. I mean, I think I did. I guess I made the payment during spring break. Is that a problem?
Well, you didn't do anything wrong, but it looks like there was an error in our system. The computer is supposed to automatically process payments when the offices are closed, but for some reason, your payment never went all the way through. It's still pending approval.
So why did I get only a final warning notice?
Well, I'm not completely sure, to be honest. We were coming back from a holiday, so there may have been some confusion.
Well then, what do I have to do to fix this?
Nothing at all. I'm approving the payment now and noting on your account that the error was ours. Just make your next payment on time and you won't have any more problems.
Wonderful. Thanks for taking care of this. That's a huge relief.
Very good. There you are. Okay, great. Now that we have listened to this conversation, that remember, you are going to be listening to conversations and to lectures, right? So this is the first conversation we have listened to. Well, an inference question for this particular conversation would look like this. What can be inferred about the student, right? As I told you, you're always going to find the word inference in any of its variations in the question. What can be inferred about the student? And here we have the options. He wants to stop getting notices from the college. His primary concern is being allowed to attend classes. He wants to leave the tuition office quickly, or he is worried about accidentally paying tuition twice. As I told you, dear students, the fact here is that an inference is basically a conclusion, right? A rational conclusion to make out of certain information you have. In this case, all the information was not given to you by any reading means. It was given to you by a listening means, right? Because you have listened to this passage. And all the information you received here that was mentioned by the students and the secretary is the information you have to use and you should use in order to infer, right? To make a rational conclusion out of that. Well, recommendations. Don't forget that although you are asked to infer something, this doesn't mean you can separate yourself from the passage and let your imagination to fly. You must infer, yes, but you must do it only with the information provided in the passage, okay? That is very important. What is the source of information you should use in order to infer is the passage, right? In this case, the listening passage you have listened to, the conversation. Now, very good. I think that is the recommendation. Now, so in this case, which one is the correct response to your students? I tell you, the correct response is, once again, option B. His primary concern is being allowed to attend classes. Why is this the correct answer? Let me tell you. Because if you noticed, dear students, the first thing he says to this secretary, after he explains and clarifies his problem, is that he's very much worried. He's very much preoccupied about being kicked out of classes, right? I don't want to be kicked out of classes. That is the first thing he says. And if you notice, this is a very, very repetitive topic in the conversation. He constantly asks the secretary, is this going to affect my classes? Am I going to be banned from attending classes? I'm worried about my classes, right? I mean, he's constantly asking about his classes. He doesn't want to be kicked out of classes. He doesn't want to be harmed in his classes. He doesn't want to be banned from classes. He wants to continue attending. And this is, as I say, a constant topic on the conversation because he says this topic and he repeats this topic several times. What does this tell you? What is this? This is a hint. This is a clue that his primary concern, what he's way concerned and preoccupied about, is being allowed to attend classes. That is the justification I give you for choosing this answer. That is the reason why this is the correct answer, because the entire information we have suggests us, give us clues, hints, give us, as I say, the suggestion that, well, his primary concern, what he's mainly concerned about is being able to attend classes. He doesn't want to lose his classes. He doesn't want to miss his classes. He wants to attend, right? He doesn't want to be kicked out. And as I say, this is a constant topic in the conversation, brought to the table by who? By the student, right? Now, it cannot be the correct answer. He wants to stop getting notices from the college, because if you listen carefully to the conversation in this case, he never says that he is worried or that he is, in this case, angered about receiving notices. What he says is that he considers the last two notices he got from the college are simply erroneous. Those shouldn't be notifications or notices for him because he has paid, right, his tuition. Nonetheless, he never says that he's actually angered and angry for receiving notices. The only thing he wants to do is to receive the corresponding notice for himself. He doesn't want to receive these threatening notices that are out of context and doesn't make sense for him because he paid the tuition. He wants to receive notices that correspond to him, the normal ones, the reminders that tell him, pay your tuition, right? C, he wants to leave the tuition office quickly. This is also false because, for example, the student never says, come on, I have to go to the bathroom, right? Or something like that, or hurry up, right? He never says anything like that, suggesting that he's actually in a hurry. The only thing he does is, as I say, to make sure that the problem is solved and that the secretary or the officer from the college assures him that he is going to be able to attend classes, right? And D, he is worried about being accidentally paying tuition twice. Wrong, because he actually said that he paid his tuition, but not that he paid twice, right? Any question, dear students, about these inference questions? Please tell me. Mariana, Roy, Abigail, questions? No questions about this one?
No question, teacher.
No questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys. Fantastic. There you are. Great. Well, we're going to stop here then. And we're going to continue tomorrow, and we're going to practice tomorrow as well. Okay? So great. And we also have Saturday. As I told you, it's okay if some of you cannot attend next Saturday. I know that many of you may have another activity or something to do. It's okay. I'm going to have full tolerance with you. All of you are going to have presence on that class. And as I say, all the material, everything we say and practice that day on Saturday is going to be uploaded to the YouTube channel and to the WhatsApp group. Therefore, you're not going to miss anything. Okay, so please, you can be very much calm and assured about that. Great, so please, dear students, I'm going to take your assistance and help me with your kind responses for the poll. You know that I appreciate your responses very much. Okay, so please help me with that. And if you have any question, any commentary, please feel free to express it. Okay. Sheets, paper. Awesome. So it's here present our dear Abigail Graciela.
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Abigail. What about our dear Roy Brian David?
Present.
Thank you very much, Roy. What about our dear Patiño Araceli? Okay, she wasn't here. What about Oscar Samuel? Wasn't here. What about our dear Vaca Mariana?
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Mariana. And Maria Cecilia Vargas. Okay. She wasn't here tonight. Well, fantastic. Thank you very much for your kind responses, dear students. It was a pleasure for me to be with you. And I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so have a wonderful night. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you.